This is Deacon Chuck Kelly for WQPH 89.3 FM, Catholic Radio, serving Shirley, Fitchburg, and the world. On Sunday, the 14th Sunday in Ordinary Time, the Gospel Antiphon reads, "May the peace of Christ control our hearts, and let the word of Christ dwell in us richly." This weekend, our first reading from Isaiah tells us to rejoice with Jerusalem. What is all this rejoicing about? Well, it's the same as all true rejoicing is. It's about what God has done and brought about. God has spread prosperity over Jerusalem like a river and like an overflowing torrent. We are to find a childlike comfort in this great gift of God. Our psalm, too, encourages all on the earth to cry out to God with joy. Why? Because God has set us free, as when he changed the sea into dry land, allowing his people to escape certain death from Pharaoh, an image of our escape from death caused by sin. Our gospel encourages us to participate by sharing how the kingdom of God is at hand, which is to say, it is within reach. We can share how living a sacramental life can indeed save us. And this should, as noted by the Gospel Antiphon, allow that peace of Christ to control our hearts and the word of Christ to dwell in us richly. In this program, we're going to hear about two saints who did just that, who allowed that peace of Christ to control their hearts and to let the word of Christ dwell in them richly. And they weren't afraid to share it. Saints Malachy and St. Laurence O'Toole, two famous Irish saints. Around the year 1095, the Catholic Church in Ireland was experiencing some glorious years. It was a time of growth for the Catholic Church. Irish missionaries marched across the continent of Europe, in France, Germany, and Italy. They were but a few of the hundreds of zealous Irish priests who carried the word of Christ into foreign lands. Ireland's monastic schools were the envy of the civilized world. Her art and architecture, usually embodied Christian symbolism, reached its zenith. It was an age of golden chalices, brilliant illuminated manuscripts, and memorable verse. All of this was to change. Continual raids by the Vikings along the Irish coast from 795 on soon expanded into major invasions. Their success varied, but the invaders did manage to establish themselves in important ports, such as Dublin and Limerick. Danes followed the Norsemen, contesting the land with them and with the Irish. Often local Irish chieftains allied themselves with the invaders against a neighbor. At the Battle of Clontarf in 1014, Brian Boru and Malachy finally routed the Northmen, killing 7,000 in a Good Friday battle, thus ending the Viking era. With the defeat of the Northmen, three powerful Irish families commenced years of bloody struggle for the post of High King of Ireland. The O'Loughlyns of Ulster, the O'Connors of Connaught, and the O'Briens of Munster marched and countermarched, winning, losing, advancing, retreating, and turning the countryside into one vast battlefield. Roderick O'Connor's ultimate triumph was cut short by the Norman invasion, which altered forever the course of Irish history. Understandably, these ceaseless wars had their effect upon the Catholic Church in Ireland. Some continental scholars have painted a very gloomy picture of the state of Irish Christianity. While these reports are much exaggerated, there is little doubt that many areas of the country were lax with regard to the sacraments, careless in some of their canonical interpretations, and corrupt in the appointment of priests, laymen, and bishops to choice clerical positions. The situation called for reform. In St. Malachy O'More, the Irish found their reformer. St. Malachy was born midway between the defeat of the Northmen and the advent of the Normans. His birthplace is uncertain, but may have been in County Down. Data on his family is also scarce, although we know that his father held a professor's chair at Armagh, and that the boy was raised in this cathedral city. During a trip to Munster in 1102, when Malachy was 7, this teacher father died, leaving a widow and 3 children. Malachy's brother, Christian, later earned lasting fame as a devout and kindly abbot. His sister, as we shall see, scandalized her pious brothers by her conduct. Malachy's mother was careful not to spoil her children, and was concerned that they should have, above all else, a fear of the Lord and a love of his commandments. These she inculcated at home while entrusting the boys to the most competent teachers in Armagh. Malachy was a good student, Faculty members marked him as obedient, respectful, and talented. Malachy later turned himself over to Imar O'Hagan, a remarkable hermit who dwelt in a cell near the church at Armagh. Imar lived a harsh existence, punishing himself with difficult labors, long hours of prayer, and even self-inflicted physical pain. Malachy adopted this regimen, living nearby and enduring the same sufferings. Friends of the young nobleman criticized his stark outlook and tried to lead him away from Imar. From the hermit, however, Malachy learned more than pain. He learned Gregorian chant, advanced theology, and he learned to admire Imar's passion for reform. Such was Malachy's progress that in 1117, Bishop Kellogg of Armagh named him deacon. Malachy was only 22, a year younger than normally required for the office. He tried unsuccessfully to refuse the honor, but once installed, he plunged earnestly into his work. One day his sister, whose immoral life was a thorn in Malachy's side, taunted him as he buried a corpse. "Don't you know that the Bible says, 'Let the dead bury the dead'?" He turned on her sharply. "You quote Scripture well, but you are ignorant of its spirit." He vowed never to speak to her again. Bishop Kellogg made Malachy his vicar general and asked him to set his hand to the reform of the diocese. In the bishop's absence, Malachy preached the efficacy of penance, the dignity of matrimony, and the proper sequence of the canonical hours. If the people would not come to him, he went to them. When Bishop Kellogg returned, he was overjoyed by the improvements Malachy had produced. The experience convinced Malachy that he needed further training. So he journeyed to Lismore to study under Malchus, a noted canonist, who was Bishop of Lismore and Waterford. The bishop employed Malachy as an assistant while he pursued his studies. While Malachy was in Lismore, news reached him of his sister's untimely death. Although he had vowed not to speak to her in life, he now directed his prayers toward her salvation. After many months, Malachy stopped praying for her, convinced she must be in heaven. One night, however, she appeared to him in a dream and said that she had eaten nothing in a month, the time of Malachy's last memorial mass. He began anew, and soon had successive dreams in which he saw his sister entering a church dressed at first in black, partway down the aisle in gray, and finally on the altar in white. He interpreted this to mean she had come to rest in Christ. In 1123, Malachy's uncle, a layman, named his young nephew to succeed him at Bangor. Again, Malachy demurred before accepting the post. He gave away all the revenue-producing monastic lands. However, much to the disappointment of his friends and superiors, Bangor, which had been one of Ireland's educational showplaces, had been reduced to ruins by Danish marauders. Malachy rebuilt it to its former glory. Then, reluctantly, he accepted the bishopric of Down and Connor, where conditions were among the worst in Ireland. Bangor remained his headquarters, but Malachy traveled his diocese preaching to individuals, small crowds, or large congregations. For 4 years he struck firmly and courageously at the barbarous customs, loose morals, and dishonest finances of the see. Once again his efforts were crowned with success. Then the wars caught up with Bishop Malachy. Conor O'Loughlin, a northern chief, drove through Down and Antrim, evicting the monks of Bangor and leveling their new monastery. Malachy fled to Munster to seek the hospitality of King Cormac MacCarthy for his dispossessed community. The previous year, Malachy had sheltered and advised this king while MacCarthy was in temporary exile. Grateful for this kindness, Cormac gave Malachy land in Kerry for a new settlement. He added sheep, cattle, money, and his own labor in constructing the Iveragh monastery. Malachy had returned to the simple life of a monk, the life he always sought and desired. Again, he was interrupted. Bishop Kellogg of Armagh died and named Malachy his successor. Malachy had anticipated this nomination because of a vision in which he was given the crozier of Kellogg. But complications arose. It was common practice for the kinsmen of the deceased prelate to elect a replacement. They settled on a man called Murtagh and placed him on the episcopal throne. Malachy refused to press his claim until Malachus Gilbert of Limerick, the papal legate, several bishops, and the kings of Desmond and Lismore insisted that he demand what was rightfully his. The papal legate even resorted to a threat of excommunication. Malachy proceeded to Armagh after exacting a promise that he could retire when he had the situation in order. For 2 years, Murtagh and Malachy quietly contested the see, although Malachy would not enter the cathedral city for fear of provoking bloodshed. Murtagh died in 1134, but named Niall, brother of Kellach, to succeed him. As Malachy called a meeting to discuss this turn of events, Niall dispatched a party of assassins who lay in waiting on a hill commanding the meeting area. A sudden storm struck the conspirators, and lightning killed a dozen of them. The plot failed. Another narrow escape for Malachy occurred when he answered a summons to a peace conference with a chieftain who intended to murder him. On meeting Malachy, the chieftain repented and became his ally. In the face of this display of power, Niall capitulated, but took with him the symbolic Armagh staff and book, which to many of the faithful represented authority. Malachy ultimately recovered both objects and reigned for 3 years as primate of the Irish Church. When Malachy returned to Bangor in 1137, he found that both Malachus and Eamar O'Hagan were dead. King Cormac and Malachy's brother Christian were to follow the next year. Although these loved ones were taken from him, Malachy had yet to meet the man who would become his dearest friend. After dividing the diocese of Down and Connor into 2 districts, Malachy rebuilt Bangor as a priory for canons regular of St. Augustine and returned to the solitary monastic schedule. Again, it was a brief interval, and the next move would find him leaving Ireland. Papal sanction had never been obtained officially for the sees of Armagh and Cashel, and Malachy determined to visit Innocent II in Rome to conclude this matter. His brethren opposed the trip and suggested that he abide by the cast of the dice. Although refusing to stake his mission on chance, he was relieved when the dice fell continually in his favor, and his monks stopped objecting. With a few companions and a trio of pack animals, Malachy embarked in late 1139 or early 1140. His ship took him from Scotland, where the group trudged overland to York. Here St. Walthorf of Wickham presented Malachy with a rather sorry horse. It is said that by a miracle the wild black bony creature became a white, docile, and magnificent steed, which served Malachy many years. Crossing to France, Malachy led his monks eastward to an encounter which was to ensure his lasting fame. At Clairvaux, he met St. Bernard, who was to become his official biographer. For a brief time, Malachy lived at Clairvaux and was completely taken by the spirit and rule of the Cistercian monks. As he proceeded to Rome, a new intention was in his mind: to request permission of the Pope to resign his bishopric and live at Clairvaux. When he arrived at the Vatican, he received an audience with Innocent II, and laid before him the matter of the Irish sees and his own preference. The Pope promised approval of the sees once official documents could be passed, but he denied Malachy's plea for the release from his Irish responsibilities. In so doing, Innocent displayed excellent judgment. As a result of his decision, the monks at Clairvaux did not gain a colleague, but Ireland herself soon had a Cistercian monastery. To ensure this, Malachy left 4 of his monks with St. Bernard to learn the Cistercian rule. When Malachy returned to Bangor, he carried with him an added assignment. Pope Innocent had named him to replace Gilbert as papal legate in Ireland. In this new capacity, he exerted his usual vigor, traveling throughout the country, making his personality felt in a struggle for reform. He invited St. Bernard to dispatch some French monks to help him in the founding of the Cistercian monastery at Melfort, 6 miles west of Drogheda. The work progressed slowly, largely due to the failure of the Irish and the French to agree on architectural design. At length, Malachy had this new foundation to list among his achievements. Malachy's miraculous powers received additional tests. He continued to heal the sick and to raise the dead to life. His unresolved debate with a heretic ended as the suddenly stricken renegade recanted on his deathbed. He kept 2 warring armies apart by causing a stream to flood in the dry season, and he cured a nagging housewife, whose tongue, says St. Bernard, created a solitude whithersoever she came. To secure the release of an imprisoned nobleman, he refused to eat until King Turlough More O'Connor pardoned the victim. These and other similar happenings are recorded by St. Bernard. When asked about his preference as to a time and a place for his death, St. Malachy replied that he would like to expire on All Souls' Day in Ireland, and if it could not be Ireland, then he would like to die at Clairvaux. His wish was close to fulfillment. After presiding at a synod on Inishpatrick off Skerries in 1148, Malachy offered to deliver the official papers on the sees of Armagh and Cashel to the new Pope Eugenius III, who was then in France. His friends again tried to dissuade him, but Malachy persisted, despite his own premonitions of death. 2 of his disciples begged him to agree in advance to a proposal they would make. Malachy assented, and then regretted the promise, since it was that he should return to Ireland. He felt certain that he would never see Erin again. However, when his ship put to sea, it was driven back upon the land by a strong headwind, and Malachy took this unexpected reversal as fulfillment of the promise. Then he crossed the Irish Sea for the last time. King Stephen of England knew of Malachy's friendship for King David of Scotland, whose son he had cured. Since Stephen suspected David of intrigue, he prevented Malachy from sailing immediately to France. This delay cost the saint a chance to confer with Pope Eugenius, who had left for Rome. So Malachy made his way to St. Bernard at Clairvaux. His last days were happy ones in the company of Bernard and his exemplary community. After celebrating Mass on the feast of St. Luke, October 18th, Malachy became ill and had to retire to his bed. The Cistercians vied with one another for the honor of ministering to their guest until Malachy, embarrassed, asked that they lavish less attention upon him. When the fever became more intense, Malachy requested that he be anointed. He refused the offer to have the last sacraments brought to him, but left his sickbed and walked to the church to receive them. Toward the evening of All Saints' Day, the dying Malachy spoke lucidly to those gathered about his cot. "I will remember you," he promised. "If such remembrance is permitted, I am certain it will be permitted, for I have believed in God, and to him who believes all things are possible. I have loved God, and I have loved you, and charity never falleth away." At midnight, Malachy serenely breathed his last. His burial took place at Clairvaux, but subsequently his skull was exhibited as a relic in the cathedral at Troyes, France. St. Bernard's head bones form a companion piece. The remaining bones of the 2 saints, though buried separately, are now intermingled with those of 3 other saints. This was the result of a move by the economically minded curé of the parish of Villassos-la-Ferte, where the remains were transferred. In some quarters, Malachy's principal legacy is the series of prophecies erroneously attributed to him. These deal with the fate of the Church in Ireland and with cryptic predictions as to the identity of future popes. Most Catholics should remember him, as did St. Bernard, in advising Eugenius III on the conduct of his office. Study the life and follow the example of St. Malachy, and all will be well. St. Laurence O'Toole, who lived from 1128 to 1180, like his contemporary St. Malachy, St. Laurence died in France and was buried in alien soil. The last of Ireland's canonized saints until the 20th century, his life spanned the most critical events in Ireland's history. Born in Lucan Ua Tuathail, Laurence is best known by his anglicized name. Even this has its story. His parents intended to christen him Conor O'Toole, but as the baptismal party was en route to the church, a holy man stopped them and proclaimed that the child should be named Laurence. At the cathedral, the stranger repeated his prophecy to the waiting father. Impressed with this omen, the family instructed the Bishop of Kildare to make the change. Scarcely a day's march from Dublin, where the infant would one day earn lasting fame, lay the little village of Castledermot. Laurence was greatly influenced by his mother and tried sincerely to imitate her charity and devotion. Even at an early age, he would slip away, seek some quiet niche, and spend hours in prayer and meditation. He was a bright student, educated by bardic tutors who frequented the courts. When Laurence was 10 years old, his father fought unsuccessfully against the army of the terrible MacMurrough. His kingdom overrun and his clansmen in retreat, Murtagh O'Toole sued for peace. One of the conditions of the surrender was the gift of a daughter to the bride of MacMurrough and the deliverance of Laurence as a hostage. In ordinary circumstances, the youthful captive could have experienced decent treatment and considerable freedom under the cruel MacMurrough. However, Laurence fared worse than any slave. For 2 years he toiled in the rocky region around Ferns. Already he was learning to endure suffering patiently and in silence. Eventually, Murtagh heard of this brutal treatment. Unable to attack MacMurrough directly, he did manage to capture a dozen of his officers who had strayed into Murray territory. In exchange for their release, he demanded that MacMurrough deliver his son to the Bishop of Glendalough. Reluctantly, MacMurrough agreed to the transfer. Laurence was sent to St. Kevin's ancient monastery above the Twin Lakes in Wicklow. His father hurried to him, impressed by the kindness of the monks and grateful for his son's escape. The O'Toole chieftain vowed that one of his 4 sons should be dedicated to the service of the church. He offered to cast lots to decide among them. At this proposal, Laurence laughed. "There is no need to cast lots, father," he declared. "For many months I have intended to become a priest." Murtagh blessed his son and then left him at Glendalough to pursue his vocation. The growth from novice to monk was a severe test of faith and endurance. The rule of St. Benedict was strict, but to Laurence, who had suffered the years of hardship at Ferns, it was filled with spiritual solace. At 25, he was chosen to lead the community as its abbot. Youth alone prevented him from being consecrated a bishop. The responsibility of being abbot was a staggering challenge for such a young man. Laurence was required to preside over men much older than himself, to guide them spiritually and provide for them materially. Despite his youth, Laurence came to be regarded by the other monks as a kindly father, and his counsel was praised as being worthy of men twice his age. Even neighboring princes came to consult this oracle of Glendalough. St. Laurence O'Toole was one of the great Irish saints, and toward the end of his life, he approached the abbey of Canons Regular of St. Victor at Eu. He predicted that that would be his final resting place. He was stricken with a fever and sought shelter in the monastery. He lingered there but a few days. While still conscious, he was asked about making a will. Laurence smiled. "God knows I have not a penny in the world," he said. His last words were about his countrymen. "Ah, foolish and senseless people, what will become of you now? Who will defend you? Who will relieve your sorrow?" On Friday, November 14th, he died. A holy man at Christ Church in Dublin witnessed the death in a vision and announced it to the Irish people days before the fact would be verified. St. Laurence O'Toole was laid to rest in France. His principal relics remain in a crypt at Notre Dame Church in Eu, although one large relic is preserved in a parish dedicated to the saint near North Strand in Dublin. 45 years later, in 1225, the miracles attributed to Bishop Laurence were authenticated, and the process of canonization was completed. St. Laurence closed out a Gaelic era, which could never be recaptured. It's a pleasure to share some of these stories with you at the Deacon's Table, the stories of our great saints of the Church. This is Deacon Chuck Kelly for WQPH 89.3 FM, Catholic Radio, serving Shirley, Fitchburg, and the world. God bless you.
Have you been listening to the Deacon's Table? Aired every Sunday at 8 p.m. We just got this wonderful letter. Dear Deacon, I am Mary Lynch from Comrack, New York, Christ the King Parish. Kelly DeMille is my godchild and loving niece. She and Brittany did a great job on that program. You are very talented as an interviewer, asking good questions in a comfortable, relaxed way. And the show really gave good sound suggestions for starting family adoration in a parish. Our parish began family adoration about 2 years ago and meets bi-weekly on one night in the week. They use the 6:30 to 7:30 time slot. Our pastor begins the holy hour. After adoration time, the children lead the rosary, and one family provides music interludes. Keep up the great work on the radio show, Deacon Chuck. Our sentiments exactly. Tune in if you have not yet shared with Deacon Chuck and listen to his program Sundays, 8 p.m. on WQPH.
On the WQPH 89.3 FM community calendar, the day retreat originally scheduled for Saturday, June 25th has been rescheduled to Saturday, July 9th, still at 8:45 a.m. to 4 p.m. at St. Benedict's Abbey, 252 Still River Road, Still River, Massachusetts, 01451. It will again be a $55 per person with a strict limit of 50 people. There are 8 spots still left, though, if you wish to be part of it. The program includes Holy Mass, coffee, morning prayers, a rosary procession, consecration, lunch, and includes an optional visit to True Devotion's gift shop. Maureen Katzban, author of Heaven's Helper, My Little Star, at Amazon, will be there speaking and will be signing copies of her book. There are several ways you can take part. You can text us at 617-459-8735. That's 617-459-8735. You can call us at 781-391-1396. That's 781-391-1396. You can email us at wqph893@comcast.net. That's wqph893@comcast.net. You can visit the website at wqphradio.org. Click on the donate button. Put in your payment of $55 through a credit card or PayPal, and note that it's for the retreat. Or you can even print out the form and mail us a check to ELRN, Post Office Box 589, Medford, Massachusetts 02155. Again, that's Saturday, July 9th, 8:45 a.m. to 4 p.m. at St. Benedict's Abbey, 252 Still River Road, Still River, Massachusetts 01451. Hope to see you there. This has been the WQPH 89.3 FM Community Calendar.